The day I came home and realized my key no longer worked, I honestly thought I had the wrong apartment. I stood there after a 10-hour shift, exhausted, still wearing my work badge around my neck, trying the lock again and again while grocery bags cut into my fingers. At first I laughed nervously. Maybe the lock was jammed. Maybe maintenance had changed something without warning. But then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. My husband's mother was standing behind the curtain, watching me. She didn't open the door right away. She just stared at me through the window like I didn't belong there anymore. And when she finally stepped outside, arms folded tightly across her chest, the first words out of her mouth changed my life forever. "You need to leave," she said coldly. "Our son deserves better." I remember blinking at her because my brain simply couldn't process what was happening. This was my home too. I paid half the rent, half the bills. I worked overtime almost every week so my husband and I could stay afloat during hard times. I had spent 3 years trying to fit into a family that never fully accepted me, but I never imagined things would go this far. Then I looked past her shoulder and saw my suitcases sitting just inside the hallway. That's when I realized this wasn't an argument. This wasn't some emotional outburst. They had planned this. And the worst part? My husband was inside the apartment the entire time. He never came to the door. If you've ever dealt with toxic in-laws, family betrayal, or a marriage that slowly falls apart while everyone pretends everything is normal, then you already know this story isn't just about changed locks. It's about loyalty. About humiliation. About what happens when the people who are supposed to protect you choose silence instead. 5 years ago, I was convinced my marriage only needed patience. I thought if I kept being respectful, kept helping, kept proving myself, eventually his parents would see me as family. But some people decide who you are before you even speak your first word, and no matter how much love you give, it will never be enough for them. My husband, Daniel, used to promise me things would get better. He always had excuses for his parents' behavior. They're old-fashioned. They're protective. They just need time. And because I loved him, I believed him. I ignored the little comments at family dinners. I ignored how his mother criticized everything from my cooking to my career. I ignored how his father barely acknowledged me unless he wanted something fixed or paid for. I kept telling myself marriage was hard work. What I didn't realize was that I was the only one working. The months leading up to that day had already been tense. Daniel had lost his job and suddenly his parents were around all the time. They acted like our apartment belonged to them. His mother would come over unannounced and reorganize my kitchen while making passive-aggressive comments about how a real wife keeps a home. His father constantly reminded Daniel that he had married beneath himself. I laughed those comments off in public, but privately they chipped away at me little by little. Till I stayed. Because when you love someone, you convince yourself to tolerate things you should probably walk away from. Then one morning, before leaving for work, Daniel barely looked at me. He seemed distracted, nervous almost. I asked if everything was okay and he forced a smile and said he was just stressed. I kissed him goodbye anyway. I had no idea that would be the last morning I walked out of that apartment as his wife. By the time I came home that evening, the locks had already been changed. I wish I could tell you I screamed or caused a scene. But honestly, shock makes you quiet. I just stood there listening while his mother explained that Daniel needed a fresh start and that I was holding him back. Like I was some obstacle standing in the way of his future instead of the woman who stayed beside him when nobody else did. Then she handed me a trash bag filled with the rest of my things. A trash bag. As neighbors walked past pretending not to stare. And through all of it, Daniel stayed hidden inside. No explanation. No goodbye. Nothing. That night, sitting alone in my car with nowhere to go, I thought my life was over. I had no idea that what felt like the worst moment of my life would eventually become the beginning of something completely different. Because 5 years later, the same people who locked me out of that apartment would show up at my door again. Only this time, everything had changed. And when I opened that door and saw the look on their faces, I realized they weren't there to insult me anymore. They were there to ask for something they never thought they'd need from me. For a few seconds, none of us spoke. Daniel's mother stood on my porch clutching her purse tightly with both hands, like she was nervous I might slam the door in her face. His father stood beside her looking older than I remembered. Not just older physically but tired in a way I couldn't explain. The kind of tired people carry after life humbles them. And Daniel? He was standing a few steps behind them near the driveway, staring down at the ground instead of at me. That alone told me something was very wrong. 5 years earlier, he couldn't even face me while his parents threw me out of our apartment. And now, after all this time, he still looked like a man hiding from consequences. I kept one hand on the door, unsure whether I even wanted to hear what they had to say. "You shouldn't have come here," I finally said. His mother opened her mouth like she wanted to defend herself, but no words came out. That shocked me more than seeing them standing there. Linda always had something to say. Always. She was the type of person who could criticize the weather and somehow make it sound personal. But now she just looked uncomfortable. "We only need a few minutes," his father said quietly. I almost laughed at that. 5 years ago, they didn't think I deserved 5 minutes of explanation before changing the locks on my home. Now suddenly they wanted my time. Funny how life works like that. The wind moved through the trees lining my street, and for a moment nobody spoke again. Behind me I could hear soft music playing from inside the house. My house. The one I bought without Daniel. The one I rebuilt my life in after spending months convinced I would never recover from the humiliation they put me through. Back then, after getting locked out, I stayed with a coworker for almost 3 weeks. I slept on an air mattress in her tiny guest room while trying to pretend my entire life hadn't collapsed overnight. During the day I worked double shifts because I needed the distraction. At night I stared at the ceiling replaying every moment of my marriage, trying to figure out where things had gone wrong. The hardest part wasn't losing Daniel. It was realizing how easily he let me go. 4 weeks after that night, I kept expecting him to call me with some explanation. Some apology. Something. Instead, I got divorce papers delivered to my office less than a month later. No note. No message. Just signatures where our marriage used to be. I found out through mutual friends that his parents had convinced him I was holding him back financially and emotionally. Apparently, I was too independent. Too career-focused. Too opinionated. According to them, a successful marriage meant a wife who stayed quiet and made her husband feel important all the time. The irony was that I spent most of our marriage supporting him. I paid bills when he struggled. I encouraged him when he doubted himself. I defended him even when people told me he relied too much on his parents. But none of that mattered in the end because Daniel cared more about keeping peace with his family than protecting his marriage. And honestly, that realization nearly destroyed me. There's something deeply painful about being rejected not just by the person you love, but by an entire family who never gave you a real chance. For a long time I blamed myself. I wondered if I should have been softer, more patient, less ambitious. Maybe if I had cooked better meals or ignored more insults or smiled through more uncomfortable family dinners, things would have turned out differently. But eventually reality caught up with me. People who truly love you don't stand silently behind locked doors while you're thrown out of your own home. That truth took years to fully accept. And somehow, standing on my porch now, looking at the same people who broke me back then, I realized I didn't feel weak anymore. I felt angry. Not loud, explosive anger. The quiet kind. The kind that settles deep after years of healing. Daniel finally looked up at me then, and for the first time in years, our eyes met properly. He looked nothing like the man I married. His shoulders sagged like life had slowly worn him down piece by piece. There were lines around his eyes I didn't remember. Even his voice sounded different when he finally spoke. "You look good," he said softly. I didn't answer. Because what exactly was I supposed to say to that? Thanks? After he disappeared from my life without even giving me a conversation? The silence stretched awkwardly between us until Linda suddenly stepped forward. "We know we hurt you," she said quickly, almost as if the words physically pained her. "And we know we don't deserve kindness after everything that happened." That caught me off guard. Not because I forgave her. I didn't. But because hearing accountability from her felt unnatural, like hearing a storm apologize for the damage it caused. I crossed my arms. "Then why are you here?" The three of them exchanged a look that instantly tightened the knot in my stomach. It wasn't just guilt bringing them to my door. It was desperation. And suddenly every instinct I had started screaming that this visit had nothing to do with closure. Something had happened. Something serious. Daniel's father rubbed his hands together nervously before speaking again. "There are things you don't know," he said carefully. "About what happened back then. About why things ended the way they did." I felt my chest tighten. Because after 5 years I thought I already knew the whole story. But the look on Daniel's face told me I didn't. Not even close. Then Linda reached into her purse with trembling hands and pulled out a thick envelope. The moment I saw my own name written across the front in Daniel's handwriting, every hair on my arms stood up. Because whatever was inside that envelope had been written years ago. And somehow, I had never seen it before. I stared at the envelope without taking it. My name was written in the same messy handwriting I used to tease Daniel about when we were married. Back then he left little notes everywhere. On the fridge. In my lunch bag. On sticky notes beside the coffee machine. Tiny reminders that made ordinary mornings feel special. Seeing that handwriting again after 5 years felt strange. Like opening a door to a version of myself I barely recognized anymore. "What is this?" I asked carefully. Daniel still couldn't fully meet my eyes. "You should read it." His mother quickly added, "Please?" That word coming from her almost unsettled me more than the envelope itself. I didn't move to take it. Instead, I leaned against the doorframe and studied all three of them. Something about this entire situation felt off. People don't disappear from your life for years and suddenly show up full of regret unless something forces them to. And whatever that reason was, they still hadn't said it. "You drove all the way here to hand me a letter?" I asked. Daniel's father exhaled slowly. "No. We came because there are things you deserve to know." I almost snapped back with something bitter, but exhaustion stopped me. Not physical exhaustion. Emotional exhaustion. The kind that creeps up when old wounds reopen before you're ready. Part of me wanted to shut the door and protect the peaceful life I'd spent years building. But another part of me needed answers. Because no matter how much healing you do, unanswered questions have a way of staying alive inside you. I finally reached for the envelope. The paper felt worn at the edges, like it had been handled many times over the years. My stomach tightened immediately. Whatever was inside this thing had clearly mattered to someone. And suddenly, I wasn't sure I wanted to know the truth anymore. "You can read it later," Daniel said quickly, almost nervously. "Maybe we should talk first." That caught my attention. Talk first? Which meant the letter probably changed everything. The silence between us grew heavier by the second. Cars passed slowly down the street while porch lights flickered on across the neighborhood. Somewhere nearby, a dog barked. Normal sounds. Normal life. Yet standing there felt surreal, like time had folded backward and dragged old pain right onto my front steps. Finally, I stepped outside and quietly closed the door behind me. Not because I trusted them, but because I didn't want them inside my home. "We have 10 minutes, I said firmly. Linda nodded immediately, almost relieved I hadn't turned them away completely. For a moment nobody seemed to know where to begin. Then Daniel rubbed his hands together nervously, the same habit he always had when stressed. "You remember the months before everything happened?" he asked. I laughed once under my breath. "Hard to forget." He swallowed hard. "Things were worse than you realized." That irritated me instantly. "Worse for who?" I asked. "Because from my perspective I got thrown out of my own apartment." "I know," he said quickly. "And I know there's no excuse for that. But..." His face tightened. There it was. The word people use when they're about to justify hurting someone. Daniel glanced toward his parents before continuing. "I lost more than my job back then." I frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" Again silence. And suddenly I noticed something strange. Linda looked terrified every time Daniel started speaking too openly, like she was worried about what he might reveal. That put me on edge immediately. Over the years, I'd replayed that period of our marriage thousands of times. The mood swings. The arguments. The sudden coldness from his family. The way Daniel became distant almost overnight. At the time, I assumed losing his job had crushed his confidence. But standing here now, I started wondering if something else had been happening behind the scenes. Something nobody told me. "There were debts," Daniel admitted quietly. I blinked. "What debts?" He looked ashamed. "A lot of them." My chest tightened. "When we were married, we shared finances. At least I thought we did. I knew about student loans and credit card balances, but nothing severe enough to destroy our lives. Or so I believed." "How much?" I asked carefully. Daniel hesitated too long. That was answer enough. A memory suddenly flashed through my mind. About 6 months before the divorce, I had noticed several missed calls from unknown numbers on Daniel's phone late at night. Whenever I asked about them, he brushed it off as recruiters or spam calls. Then there were the random arguments about money that never fully made sense. Times he insisted we couldn't afford simple things even though I knew exactly how much we had in savings. My stomach dropped. "You lied to me," I whispered. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. "I didn't know how to tell you." Linda stepped in quickly. "He was trying to protect you." I turned sharply toward her. "Protect me from what?" Nobody answered immediately. And that silence scared me more than any explanation could have. Daniel's father finally spoke in a low voice. "Things got out of control." The tension in my chest tightened harder. "What things?" Daniel looked pale now. Like talking about this physically hurt him. "A friend convinced me to invest in something," he admitted carefully. "At first it worked. I made money fast. Then I started borrowing more to keep going." I stared at him. "Oh my God. It wasn't supposed to happen like that." How much did you lose? Again silence. Then Linda quietly said, almost everything. The world around me suddenly felt strangely distant. Because if that was true, then my marriage hadn't ended over family disapproval alone. There had been secrets buried underneath everything. Financial problems. Was fear. And somehow I never saw any of it. Or maybe I did see pieces of it, but love made me ignore the warning signs. I looked back down at the envelope in my hands. What's in this letter? Daniel answered immediately this time. The truth. His voice cracked slightly when he said it. And for the first time since they arrived, I saw something real in his expression. Not guilt. Not shame. Fear. The kind of fear people carry when they know one piece of information could destroy whatever fragile version of the past still exists. Then Linda suddenly grabbed Daniel's arm tightly. Not here, she whispered urgently. That tiny moment changed everything. Because it confirmed what I'd already started suspecting. There was still something they weren't telling me. Something bigger than debt. Something connected to the night they changed the locks. And judging by the panic in Linda's eyes, whatever secret they had protected for 5 years was finally starting to fall apart. For a moment, nobody moved. The porch light buzzed softly above us while the dark sedan disappeared at the end of the street. But the fear on Daniel's face stayed exactly the same. And suddenly, after 5 years of believing I understood my own past, I realized I might have only known the surface of it. I tightened my grip on the envelope. You're telling me someone could actually come here looking for me? We don't know that for sure, Linda said quickly. But it's possible, I fired back. Nobody answered. That silence was answer enough. A cold knot settled in my stomach. I looked around my quiet neighborhood differently now. The parked cars. The dark windows across the street. The normal sounds that suddenly didn't feel normal anymore. For years, I worked hard to rebuild my life after my marriage collapsed. I moved cities. Changed routines. Focused on my career. Built friendships. Bought this house. Piece by piece, I created stability again. And now Daniel was standing on my porch telling me the chaos I escaped might not actually be over. You should have stayed away from me, I whispered. Daniel looked crushed by that sentence because deep down he knew I was right. I tried, he admitted quietly. That caught my attention immediately. Tried. His father looked uncomfortable again. Linda turned sharply toward him as if silently warning him not to say too much. But Daniel seemed done hiding things. At first, after the divorce, I kept checking on you from a distance, he said. Just to make sure you were okay. I stared at him in disbelief. What? You never noticed because I made sure you didn't. That should have sounded comforting. Instead, it unsettled me. You followed me? No, he said quickly. Not like that. I just asked mutual friends about you sometimes. Drove past your apartment once in a while. Linda interrupted immediately. Daniel? No, Mom, he snapped, frustration finally breaking through. She deserves the truth. The tension between them was obvious now. And for the first time, I noticed something strange about Linda's behavior tonight. She wasn't just scared of whatever was happening now. She was scared of what Daniel might reveal about the past. I folded my arms tightly. What aren't you telling me? Daniel looked exhausted. The debts weren't only mine. Everything inside me froze. Slowly I turned toward his parents. Linda immediately shook her head. Don't do this here. But it was too late. Because the look on Daniel's face told me something massive had just shifted. My mind raced through memories at lightning speed. The expensive gifts his parents used to buy despite constantly complaining about money. The sudden vacations they took during the same period Daniel claimed finances were tight. The countless times Linda pressured Daniel about investments and making smarter financial moves. A horrible realization began forming. You were involved? I asked quietly. Daniel's father looked away first. That was all I needed. Oh my God. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, Linda whispered. I almost laughed from disbelief. Every single time people destroy lives, they say the same thing afterward. It wasn't supposed to happen. I took another step back from them. So let me get this straight, I said slowly. You all dragged me out of my home, made me believe my husband abandoned me, and now you're telling me this entire disaster involved your family too? We were trying to fix it, Linda said desperately. By ruining my life? Her eyes filled with tears again, but I couldn't even process that anymore. My head was spinning too fast. Daniel rubbed his face tiredly before speaking again. My dad invested money with someone he trusted from work. Then I got involved because the returns looked real. At first everything worked exactly how they promised. And then? His jaw tightened. And then people started losing money. A chill ran through me. Not just because of the situation itself, but because I could finally see how deeply trapped Daniel must have been back then. The pressure, the fear, the shame. Still, none of it justified what they did to me. Not even close. How much did you lose? I asked again. This time Daniel answered. Enough that they threatened lawsuits. Collections. Worse. The way he said worse made my stomach twist. Before I could ask another question, my phone buzzed suddenly in my hand. Every single person flinched. I looked down at the screen. Unknown number. My heartbeat immediately sped up. Linda looked terrified. Don't answer it. The call kept vibrating between my fingers. Unknown number. Unknown number. Unknown number. Over and over. Daniel stared at the phone like it was a loaded weapon. Has this been happening before? He asked urgently. I shook my head slowly. No. The ringing stopped. For 1 second, everything went silent again. Then a text message appeared. My chest tightened instantly. It was from the same number. I opened it carefully while all three of them watched me. The message was short. Tell Daniel hiding won't fix this. I felt the blood drain from my face. Nobody spoke. Daniel looked sick. Linda actually grabbed onto her husband's arm to steady herself. And suddenly this entire situation stopped feeling like painful family drama and started feeling genuinely dangerous. How do they have my number? I whispered. Daniel didn't answer immediately. That hesitation terrified me more than the message itself. How do they have my number? I repeated louder. Finally, he looked at me with pure guilt written all over his face. Because they've known about you for years. The world around me seemed to tilt. What? They knew we were married. They knew where we lived back then. His voice cracked slightly. And after the divorce, I thought they stopped paying attention. Thought. Again that word. Always thought. Never knew. Anger exploded through me so suddenly I could barely breathe. You let me spend 5 years thinking I escaped all of this. I was trying to keep you out of it. You already dragged me into it. The force of my own voice echoed across the quiet street. A porch light turned on 2 houses down. Daniel lowered his voice immediately. Please. Just listen to me. No, you listen to me, I snapped. You don't get to show up after destroying my life and suddenly act like some protector. His expression broke slightly at that. Because he knew I was right. Then his father suddenly spoke in a shaky voice. There's something else. I looked at him sharply. And the fear on his face instantly made my stomach drop again. What now? He swallowed hard before answering. The money was never fully paid back. Silence. Complete silence. Then Daniel quietly added the part that truly changed everything. And someone recently found out where you live. For a moment, nobody moved. The porch light buzzed softly above us while the dark sedan disappeared at the end of the street. But the fear on Daniel's face stayed exactly the same. And suddenly, after 5 years of believing I understood my own past, I realized I might have only known the surface of it. I tightened my grip on the envelope. You're telling me someone could actually come here looking for me? We don't know that for sure, Linda said quickly. But it's possible, I fired back. Nobody answered. That silence was answer enough. A cold knot settled in my stomach. I looked around my quiet neighborhood differently now. The parked cars. The dark windows across the street. The normal sounds that suddenly didn't feel normal anymore. For years, I worked hard to rebuild my life after my marriage collapsed. I moved cities. Changed routines. Focused on my career. Built friendships. Bought this house. Piece by piece, I created stability again. And now Daniel was standing on my porch telling me the chaos I escaped might not actually be over. You should have stayed away from me, I whispered. Daniel looked crushed by that sentence because deep down he knew I was right. I tried, he admitted quietly. That caught my attention immediately. Tried. His father looked uncomfortable again. Linda turned sharply toward him as if silently warning him not to say too much. But Daniel seemed done hiding things. At first, after the divorce, I kept checking on you from a distance, he said. Just to make sure you were okay. I stared at him in disbelief. What? You never noticed because I made sure you didn't. That should have sounded comforting. Instead, it unsettled me. You followed me? No, he said quickly. Not like that. I just asked mutual friends about you sometimes. Drove past your apartment once in a while. Linda interrupted immediately. Daniel? No, Mom, he snapped, frustration finally breaking through. She deserves the truth. The tension between them was obvious now. And for the first time, I noticed something strange about Linda's behavior tonight. She wasn't just scared of whatever was happening now. She was scared of what Daniel might reveal about the past. I folded my arms tightly. What aren't you telling me? Daniel looked exhausted. The debts weren't only mine. Everything inside me froze. Slowly I turned toward his parents. Linda immediately shook her head. Don't do this here. But it was too late. Because the look on Daniel's face told me something massive had just shifted. My mind raced through memories at lightning speed. The expensive gifts his parents used to buy despite constantly complaining about money. The sudden vacations they took during the same period Daniel claimed finances were tight. The countless times Linda pressured Daniel about investments and making smarter financial moves. A horrible realization began forming. You were involved? I asked quietly. Daniel's father looked away first. That was all I needed. Oh my God. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, Linda whispered. I almost laughed from disbelief. Every single time people destroy lives they say the same thing afterward. It wasn't supposed to happen. I took another step back from them. So let me get this straight, I said slowly. You all dragged me out of my home, made me believe my husband abandoned me, and now you're telling me this entire disaster involved your family too? We were trying to fix it, Linda said desperately. By ruining my life? Her eyes filled with tears again, but I couldn't even process that anymore. My head was spinning too fast. Daniel rubbed his face tiredly before speaking again. My dad invested money with someone he trusted from work. Then I got involved because the returns looked real. At first everything worked exactly how they promised. And then? His jaw tightened. And then people started losing money. A chill ran through me. Not just because of the situation itself, but because I could finally see how deeply trapped Daniel must have been back then. The pressure, the fear, the shame. Still, none of it justified what they did to me. Not even close. How much did you lose? I asked again. This time Daniel answered. Enough that they threatened lawsuits. Collections. Worse. The way he said worse made my stomach twist. Before I could ask another question, my phone buzzed suddenly in my hand. Every single person flinched. I looked down at the screen. A known number. My heartbeat immediately sped up. Linda looked terrified. Don't answer it. The call kept vibrating between my fingers. A known number. A known number. A known number. Over and over. Daniel stared at the phone like it was a loaded weapon. Has this been happening before? He asked urgently. I shook my head slowly. No. The ringing stopped. For 1 second, everything went silent again. Then a text message appeared. My chest tightened instantly. It was from the same number. I opened it carefully while all three of them watched me. The message was short. Tell Daniel hiding won't fix this. I felt the blood drain from my face. Nobody spoke. Daniel looked sick. Linda actually grabbed onto her husband's arm to steady herself. And suddenly this entire situation stopped feeling like painful family drama and started feeling genuinely dangerous. How do they have my number? I whispered. Daniel didn't answer immediately. That hesitation terrified me more than the message itself. How do they have my number? I repeated louder. Finally, he looked at me with pure guilt written all over his face. Because they've known about you for years. The world around me seemed to tilt. What? They knew we were married. They knew where we lived back then. His voice cracked slightly. And after the divorce, I thought they stopped paying attention. Thought. Again that word. Always thought. Never knew. Anger exploded through me so suddenly I could barely breathe. You let me spend 5 years thinking I escaped all of this. I was trying to keep you out of it. You already dragged me into it. The force of my own voice echoed across the quiet street. A porch light turned on 2 houses down. Daniel lowered his voice immediately. Please. Just listen to me. No, you listen to me, I snapped. You don't get to show up after destroying my life and suddenly act like some protector. His expression broke slightly at that. Because he knew I was right. Then his father suddenly spoke in a shaky voice. There's something else. I looked at him sharply. And the fear on his face instantly made my stomach drop again. What now? He swallowed hard before answering. The money was never fully paid back. Silence. Complete silence. Then Daniel quietly added the part that truly changed everything. And someone recently found out where you live. For a few seconds I couldn't even speak. The words echoed in my head over and over. Someone recently found out where you live. I stared at Daniel, trying to decide whether I was more angry or afraid. Maybe both. My entire body felt tense, like every instinct was warning me something bigger was about to happen. How? I finally asked. How did they find me? Daniel's father looked miserable. We don't know exactly. That's not good enough. It's the truth, Daniel said quietly. We only found out because someone contacted my father last week asking questions about you. A cold chill ran through me. Questions about me. Not Daniel. Me. And suddenly I understood why they looked panicked when they arrived tonight. This wasn't guilt bringing them to my door after 5 years. It was fear. Real fear. I tightened my grip on the envelope so hard the paper bent slightly. Who are these people? Daniel hesitated. Back then I thought I was borrowing money from investors. But some of the people involved weren't exactly legal. My stomach dropped. You mean criminals? Linda covered her face with one hand like hearing the words out loud physically hurt her. Daniel gave a slow nod. The street suddenly felt too open. Too exposed. Every parked car now made me nervous. You should call the police, I said immediately. We already did, his father admitted. That surprised me. And? They said unless there's a direct threat, there isn't much they can do. I looked down at the text message again. Tell Daniel hiding won't fix this. At first glance it sounded vague. But standing here now it felt deeply personal. Like someone wanted us to know they were watching. And then something hit me. I slowly looked up at Daniel. You said you checked on me after the divorce. He nodded carefully. How often? His silence answered before he spoke. Too often. A terrible thought formed in my mind. Did anyone ever follow you? Daniel's expression changed instantly. That was the moment I knew. Oh my God. There were a few times, he admitted quietly. But I thought I lost them. You thought. I snapped. You keep saying thought. I was trying to protect you. You were still watching me. I shouted. My voice cracked from frustration and fear. Years of confusion and heartbreak were crashing together all at once. I had spent so long believing I was abandoned because I wasn't good enough. Meanwhile, Daniel had apparently been circling my life from a distance while dangerous people slowly connected the dots. The realization made me furious. And somehow heartbreakingly sad at the same time. Before anyone could respond, headlights suddenly flashed across the street again. The same dark sedan rolled slowly past my house. This time it stopped. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The tinted window lowered halfway, but the inside of the car stayed too dark to see clearly. Then the driver lifted one hand casually. Not waving. Just acknowledging us. Like he knew exactly who we were. Linda gasped softly beside me. Daniel stepped slightly in front of me without thinking. Instinct. Protection. Maybe guilt. I didn't know anymore. The sedan stayed there for 3 long seconds before driving away again. But this time, Daniel's father pulled out his phone immediately. We need to go, he said urgently. That caught my attention. Go where? Anywhere except standing out here. For the first time all night, I stopped resisting and listened to the fear in their voices. Because whatever mistakes they made years ago, this terror was real. I unlocked my door quickly and let them inside. The moment the door shut behind us, the house felt too quiet. Linda paced near the kitchen while Daniel stood near the window watching the street carefully. His father was already dialing someone. And suddenly my safe little world no longer felt safe at all. I looked down at the envelope again. Tell me what's in this. Daniel turned away from the window slowly. It's the letter I wrote the night you got locked out. The room went silent. My chest tightened painfully. What? I left it for you, he said quietly. But my mother never gave it to you. I looked sharply at Linda. Tears immediately filled her eyes. I thought it would make things worse, she whispered. You hid it from me for 5 years? My voice shook with disbelief. Linda broke down completely then. You were supposed to hate him, she cried. It was safer that way. Safer. That word again. Everything they did to me had been wrapped inside that excuse. But even then I couldn't ignore the anger burning through me. You stole my chance to know the truth, I said. She couldn't even look at me. With shaking hands I finally opened the envelope. Inside was a thick stack of folded pages. Daniel's handwriting covered every inch. The first line alone nearly stopped my heart. If you're reading this, it means I failed to protect you the right way. My vision blurred slightly. I kept reading. Daniel explained everything. The debts. The pressure. The threats. The reason he became distant. The reason he agreed to the divorce. Every page sounded like a man drowning while trying desperately not to pull someone else underwater with him. And then I reached the final page. That's where everything changed. Because the last paragraph wasn't about money. It was about Linda. I slowly lowered the paper and looked up at her. Her face instantly crumbled. No, she whispered. Daniel looked confused. What? My heart was pounding so hard it hurt. The letter revealed something Daniel never knew. 5 years ago, before the locks were changed, Linda secretly met with one of the men connected to the debt. Alone. And according to Daniel's own words, she made a deal. A deal to keep me out of it permanently. The room exploded into confusion immediately. What deal? Daniel demanded. Linda started crying harder. I was trying to save our family. What did you do? His husband shouted. But I already knew the answer before she said it. Because suddenly every missing piece fit together. The rushed divorce. The silence. The fear. The reason I became the target instead of Daniel. Linda finally looked at me through tears. I told them where you worked, she admitted weakly. I thought if they believed you had access to money too, they'd leave Daniel alone. The entire room went dead silent. I felt physically sick. 5 years. 5 years believing I was simply unwanted by my in-laws. When the truth was so much worse. Linda hadn't just thrown me out of the family. She had sacrificed me to protect her son. Nobody spoke for what felt like forever. Linda sat at my kitchen table crying quietly while Daniel stared at her like he didn't recognize his own mother anymore. His father looked completely shattered, one hand pressed against his forehead as if years of secrets had finally become too heavy to carry. And me? I just stood there holding that letter, trying to process the fact that the worst moment of my life had been carefully arranged by someone who claimed it was for my own protection. The pain of being locked out of my home all those years ago suddenly felt different now. Before, I believed I had simply lost a husband and a marriage. But this truth was uglier. I had been sacrificed. Not because I deserved it. Not because I failed as a wife. But because panic and fear made people selfish. Daniel finally found his voice first. You told them about her? He asked his mother quietly. Linda couldn't stop crying. I didn't know what else to do. You could have told me the truth. You weren't thinking clearly back then, she snapped suddenly, years of guilt exploding out at once. You were drowning in debt, terrified, barely sleeping, and those men kept calling the house. I thought if they believed she had separated from you financially, they'd stop watching you so closely. But you gave them her information, he said. Her silence confirmed everything. Daniel turned away from her completely after that. I could see the exact moment something broke inside him. Not anger. Something deeper than that. The realization that the person he trusted most had crossed a line even he never would have crossed. And honestly, part of me felt the same. For years, I blamed Daniel entirely for abandoning me. But now I could finally see the full picture. Weakness, fear, pressure, manipulation. None of it excused his choices, but it explained them in a way I never expected. Linda wiped her face shakily. After the divorce, they stopped asking about you for a while. I thought it was over. But it wasn't, I said quietly. She shook her head. Daniel's father finally spoke. A few months ago, one of the men connected to everything got released from prison after a fraud investigation. The room went cold again. And he started asking questions, Daniel added. About old money. Old connections. People connected to me. I sat down slowly because my legs suddenly felt weak. So what happens now? Nobody had a good answer. That was the scary part. There wasn't some dramatic mastermind chasing us through the night like a movie. It was something more realistic and unsettling than that. Loose ends. Old debts. People looking for money they believed still existed. Fear that had survived for years. Daniel finally sat across from me at the table, exhausted. I never stopped regretting what happened to you, he said quietly. I looked at him for a long moment. 5 years ago, hearing those words would have destroyed me emotionally. I would have cried. I would have wanted explanations and apologies and maybe even another chance. But life had changed me. Pain changes you. Healing changes you too. I believe you regret it, I said honestly. But regret doesn't erase what happened. He nodded slowly. I know. And for the first time in years, that conversation felt real. No excuses. No pretending. Just truth sitting painfully between us. We stayed up for hours talking through everything. The debts had mostly been resolved years earlier through settlements and investigations tied to the fraud scheme Daniel and his father got trapped in. But a few people connected to it still believed money had been hidden somewhere. That was why the messages started again. That was why the sedan appeared. Someone thought Daniel still had access to money through me. The irony almost made me laugh. 5 years ago, they threw me away because they thought I was a burden. Now strangers assumed I was secretly protecting their missing fortune. Life really does have a twisted sense of humor sometimes. By 2 in the morning, we agreed on something important. Daniel and his parents would formally report the recent contact and messages again, This time with all the old records and details they previously hid out of shame. No more secrets. No more silence. And as for me, I made one thing very clear. I'm not running anymore, I told them firmly. Linda looked ashamed. You shouldn't have ever had to. She was right. That was the tragedy of the whole story. Not the debt. Not the toxic in-laws. Not even the divorce. The real tragedy was how fear turned people against someone who loved them. By the time sunrise started creeping through the kitchen windows, the tension in the house felt different. Still heavy but honest now. Like years of lies had finally collapsed under their own weight. Daniel stood near the front door before leaving and looked at me carefully. There's one more thing you should know. I folded my arms. What? He gave a tired smile. I never remarried. That caught me off guard. Not because I still wanted him, but because some part of me always assumed he moved on easily while I was rebuilding myself from scratch. I tried dating, he admitted quietly. But nothing ever felt right after you. I didn't know what to say to that. Some stories don't end with romance returning. Sometimes too much damage exists. Sometimes love simply arrives at the wrong time in people's lives. And honestly, that's okay. Because not every ending needs reconciliation to mean something. Before leaving, Daniel handed me the final page of the letter separately. You can throw the rest away if you want, he said softly. But keep that page. After they finally drove away, I locked the door behind them and stood alone in the quiet house for a long time. Then I read the last page again. At the very bottom, underneath everything else, Daniel had written one final sentence 5 years ago. If loving me ever made you question your worth, then I failed you long before the locks changed. That line stayed with me. Not because it fixed the past. Nothing could fix the past. But because after years of carrying shame that never belonged to me, I finally understood something important. Their choices were never a reflection of my value. Toxic families have a way of making one person carry the weight of everyone else's dysfunction. And if you stay long enough, you start believing their chaos is somehow your fault. It isn't. The locks they changed 5 years ago were supposed to break me permanently. Instead, they forced me to rebuild a life stronger than the one I lost. A better career. Real peace. A home nobody could take from me. And strangely enough, the people who once looked down on me ended up standing on my porch asking for honesty, help, and forgiveness. Life came full circle in a way none of us expected. A few weeks later, the strange call stopped completely after authorities reopened parts of the old investigation connected to the fraud case. The sedan never returned. Eventually, the fear faded little by little until my neighborhood felt like home again instead of a memory haunted by secrets. I still haven't fully forgiven Daniel's parents. Maybe I never will. But I also stopped carrying hatred for them. Because at some point, you realize anger keeps you emotionally tied to people who already took too much from you. And I refuse to give them another 5 years of my life. Sometimes the best revenge after betrayal, divorce, toxic in-laws, and heartbreak isn't getting even. It's healing so completely that their choices no longer control your future. And that's exactly what I finally did.